buy flowers, always show up on time. They always make calls, always on that FaceTime. Something about when they're holding me late at night. It feels good but not.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kiana and I do a lot of sewing and fashion videos, and today I have a tutorial and pattern on this open back midi dress. However, while I did just say that this is an open back dress, I do have an option in the pattern to have a completely closed regular back. And while the example and tutorial does show me creating a slit in the dress, you do have the option of creating 2 slits or 0 slits. The pattern is exactly the same. Now this is going to be a sewing tutorial. If you want to see the full process up until this point, so like pattern making and alterations, you can check out my video from last week. But if you're just interested in the tutorial and pattern for this dress, that pattern is the first link down below. And you guys know that I like to give you a little discount for being early. So if you want to check out that pattern now, I am running a discount of 30% off until tomorrow at midnight Eastern time. And to get that 30% off discount, all you gotta do is use the code OPENBACK when checking out. And do make sure that you're subscribed and have those notification bells turned on so that you don't miss my next discount. Also check out that first link down below to check out the pattern listing description to see all the supplies and materials needed for this project and the kinds of fabrics that I would recommend. Basically, all of that good info is gonna be in the listing description and your instruction pamphlet if you choose to buy the pattern. Oh, and don't forget that all of the machinery and equipment I've used throughout this video is linked down below. All right, you guys, so I'm super excited to get into this tutorial, so let's start. All right, so step 1 is to, of course, print out your pattern. And I want you guys to notice this important note in bold and red at the bottom of the first page of your print files. It's telling you what pages you need to print if you want to do an open back versus a closed back. So just keep that in mind. You don't need to print all of the pages to conserve paper. Now make sure you are also using the correct file that corresponds with the paper that you're printing on. So for example, if you're using A4 size paper, use the A4 size file. Next, just line up all of your sheets of paper without overlapping. If you don't have borderless printing, I don't have borderless printing as you can see, that's okay. Just make sure that you print out at 100% scale. Then just tape everything together using the letter diamonds. Now if you look over here, you have this random floating pattern piece that doesn't connect to anything. You can disregard that. That is the closed back option. So if you print the open back, you'll get a little of the closed back and vice versa. I formatted it so that someone who wanted to print both options wouldn't have to waste like 8 sheets of paper. Now make sure you refer to your instruction pamphlet to figure out what size you want to create. I am creating a size small. And just repeat this for all of your other pattern pieces. Now guys, I want to emphasize that this is a very easy pattern and it will make your life a whole lot easier if you pay attention to all of the notches on this pattern, because there are a lot. So make sure you notch your fabric wherever you see these black triangles and the red lines. So let's point all of them out. On the back bodice piece, you'll have one at the arm's eye and one at the center back. The sleeve will have them at the front, back, and top of the sleeve cap. The front dress will have notches at the arm's eye, the waist, and where the slit begins. If you don't want your slit to be too revealing, you want to be a little bit more modest, you can change where this begins. And if you don't want to have a slit at all, then just omit this notch. The back is very similar. It has a notch at the waistline, one right below the waistline, and then again where the slit is. Now grab your fabric, and I recommend a high stretch knit fabric for this, so something like a ribbed. This dress is small and it's meant to stretch around you. When you're working with ribs especially, make sure that everything is lined up nice and straight, because if you cut something slightly off center or slightly diagonal, you're gonna notice because of those straight lines. Now moving on to sewing the dress. So I'm gonna grab the top binding and I'm gonna fold it in half wrong sides together and give it a really good press. Now I'm going to place the binding on the back bodice, right sides together, along that long curved edge. You're going to notice the binding is not as long as that curved edge, so you're going to have to stretch and pin to get this binding to fit. Then just sew this seam, and your seam allowance for this entire project is 1/2 inch. Be very careful when you're serging that you do not sew through a pin. Alternatively, if you do not have a serger, you can absolutely still do this project. Just use a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch on your sewing machine. Now let's bring this over to our ironing board to press. you want to press with the seam allowance pointed towards the side seam of the bodice. This way it will not roll out while you're wearing the dress. Make sure you're pressing nice and flat and that your seam is not puckered. And then just repeat this entire process with your second top binding strip and the other side of the bodice. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for the back of the skirt and the skirt binding. So again, you're going to have to stretch and pin so that you can sew it to fit. And then again, just bring it over to your ironing board and press it nice and flat with that seam allowance pointed towards the hem this time. Now in this next step, this is where the bulk of the dress is going to come together, so get excited and get ready. I'm placing the back skirt to the front dress, right sides together, and I'm going to look at my notches. I'm going to take the top notch on the back skirt and line it up with the notch on the front dress. These are the waist notches so that you know that the back skirt is in the correct place. Now if you are creating a slit, make sure you find those slit notches on the front and back of the dress and line those up and pin. And then you can pin above that slit notch. For the other side of the dress, if you are not creating a slit on that side, just pin the entirety of that back skirt to the front dress on that side seam. Okay, so now we're going to add the back bodice. We're going to place the back bodice to the front dress, right sides together. It's going to overlap the back skirt. The very end of the back bodice should line up with the bottom notch on the back skirt. So remember how there were two notches? Now the back bodice is going to end at that second notch. So pin up those side seams, and while we are here, we are also going to pin up the shoulder seams. We're going to sew for the side seam with the slit above the slit, for the side seam without the slit, the entirety of that side seam, and we're going to sew the two shoulder seams. We're going to sew everything normally with our serger except for the side seam with the slit. If you don't have a serger, then this is actually not really going to affect anything, but you can't sew it normally with a serger. I created this sample to show you how to sew the slit, and I'm going to be using contrasting thread so that you can really see what I'm doing and so that you won't be confused. I did not want you guys to be confused. So acting like this is the side seam of my dress, I'm pinning it where the slit begins. The left side is going to be the top of the dress. The right side is going to be the bottom of the dress where the slit is. We are going to pin and sew from the top of the dress to where the slit begins. We are going to stop sewing where the slit begins. And we are going to use our regular home sewing machine, and we are going to use a zigzag stitch so that this stitch can still stretch while we're wearing it. Using a zigzag stitch is going to mean that you're not going to pop this seam down the road. So see how it still has good stretch to it? That's exactly what we want. Now we are going to open up the seam and press everything open 1/2 inch. The entire seam where it's been sewn and where it has not been sewn. Just iron it open 1/2 inch. Now where the seam is free, where the slit is, we're going to take that seam allowance and fold it under another 1/4 inch. So this is just the seam allowance around the slit. The seam allowance where the seam is sewn is not pressed again. Now it's time to stitch the slit down. I'm going to lengthen my stitch and use 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch all the way down that slit. When I reach the beginning of the slit, I'm going to stop, pivot, sew across that side seam, then stop, pivot again, and sew down the rest of my slit. And something to know is that I'm just using a regular straight stitch here with my stitch length lengthened to 3.5 for top stitching. Now we can just leave it like this. If you don't have a serger, this is how you're going to leave it anyways, but if you do have a serger and you want to finish this edge, you can go ahead and do that. Just serge off the fabric before you reach the slit. And you don't have to finish it. You can if you want to make it look nicer, but knits are not going to ravel. Now last step is to press the seam. Because half the seam is pressed open and half the seam is now sewn together, you're going to need to make a little clip at the bottom of that serged seam just so that you can press it to the side. Alright, so now the body of our dress should be sewn. We are ready to put in our neckband. Grab your neckband, fold it in half, right sides together, and pin and sew along the short edge. To prepare the neckline, grab your two back bodice pieces and overlap them, doesn't matter which side is on top, it's up to you, and line them up at those center back notches that we made earlier. Then just pin in place. Grab the neckband that we prepared and find the seam that you sewed. We're going to want to hide that, so fold the neckband in half again to hide that seam. And then you can pin it closed if you want. I really like to quarter my neckband, so I like to divide my neckband into quarters using pins so it's easier to insert into the neckline. Likewise, I also like to divide my neckline into quarters using pins so that when I insert my neckband, I can easily match up those pins to make sure that I'm stretching the neckband equally across the neckline. Now just grab your neckband, place it right sides together with the neckline of your dress, and pin it in place. Like I said earlier, it's really easy now that we've quartered both of these things because we can just match up the pins. This way we don't have to second guess if we are stretching the neckband in the right places and making sure it's all even. This just takes out the guesswork and it makes your neckband look super professional. So I definitely recommend doing this. Once you have everything pinned, just serge around this seam. Alright guys, final stretch, we are going to move on to the sleeves. Fold the sleeves in half, right sides together, and pin and sew along the inseam. Now to install the sleeves. So I find this is easiest if you have the body of the dress turned inside out and the sleeves turned right side out. Insert the sleeve into the arm side. Make sure that you match up the notches. So the front sleeve is going to have a single notch and the back part of the sleeve is going to have a double notch. Also make sure that you're lining up that top sleeve cap notch with the shoulder seam of your dress. Pin all the way around the sleeve until you are comfortable and then just sew this seam. And then repeat for the other sleeve. Lastly, we just have to hem the dress and hem the sleeves. So we have 1-inch hem allowances. So you can choose to either turn the hem twice at a 1/2 inch or just once at 1 inch. I'm going to turn it once at 1 inch. This is not necessary, but for a cleaner edge, I'm going to just serge the edge of the hem first. Now just hem the dress with some type of stretch stitch. You can use a zigzag, but I'm going to be using a twin needle to help mimic the look of a cover stitch. Now just repeat that exact hemming process for your sleeves. So whatever hemming process you used on the hem of your dress, you want to mimic that for the sleeves as well. And then after that, you are done.
Buy flowers, always show up on time. They always make calls, always on that FaceTime.
Alright, so that is how you make this open back midi dress. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and learned a few things. If you did learn something or if you liked this video, feel free to give me a thumbs up because it is the easiest way to support your favorite creators for free. Let me know down below how you envision yourself using this pattern. And if you do recreate this or use this pattern, definitely send me a photo through Instagram because I love to see your creations and I do tend to repost some on my story. But if you aren't following me on Instagram or TikTok, feel free to do so. My handle is Kiana. And yeah, I think that is everything. Don't forget that the discount code for this pattern will expire tomorrow at midnight Eastern time, so you want to get on that. But thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!